Sir, thank you so much for talking to us. These pictures we're seeing are, I mean, you have your hands full and your officers have their hands full. These big crowds, a lot of people at the beach, at the bars. Tell us what, you've been seeing, what your officers have been seeing.
Brianna, good afternoon, and thank you for being on this segment. Again, this has been a challenging time for us as a police department. Number one, we're weighing the responsibility for public safety, dealing with the COVID and the potential COVID re-outbreak, if you will, from the first outbreak that happened last year. We have not lost sight of both objectives, and we're trying to obviously balance the two.
And two officers were hurt. What are officers coming up against as they deal with crowds?
Well, what's happening is, as with many spring break locations are seeing, is that the spring breakers tend to congregate closer to one another. When they do that, the social distancing component goes right out the window. The crowd starts to swell, and then invariably what ends up happening is someone will go into the crowd, they'll promote some type of activity, which eventually will end up leading to some type of a confrontation. What my officers did this past weekend was they tried to go ahead and actually extract someone from the crowd that was doing just that. In the process of doing that, the subject turned on my officers. He ended up striking one of my officers and engaging. At that point in time, the decision was made to place him under arrest, and that's when obviously the crowd began to be more aggressive towards our officers, and we had to take actions in order to be able to go ahead and disperse the crowd.
This, I know you're dealing with crowds. Are you worried that they're going to get worse?
As far as the overall crowd numbers go, we saw a significant increase from this week, from last week. My belief is it's going to be consistent for the rest of the time that's deemed to be the spring break period, which goes well into April. We're hoping that by presence and by persistence, and that by persistence I mean the enforcement of those rules and laws that that we're going to enforce down here, will keep the crowd at bay. And we've been very fortunate to have been able to do that so far. But as evident by the number of arrests that we made just this week, it's a challenge for us to be able to stay on top of it.
We saw pictures over the weekend of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis at Daytona Bike Week. He's not wearing a mask. He is certainly very close physically to other people who are not wearing masks. Does this make things more difficult as your officers are facing? They're facing violence. They're facing resistance to people who they want to behave like the governor's behaving.
Well, again, we're seeing a number of people that are coming down to South Florida and they're not wearing masks. My officers are. We've experienced a significant number, not only infections, but exposures within our own ranks, and we're concerned. So they're carrying that concern back to the people that are here, and so much so that we passed out over almost 7,000 masks this weekend alone, trying to get people to recognize the threat of the virus and the potential spread of the virus if they don't take those precautions. So we're still taking it seriously. We obviously don't want to see any more in our ranks contract the virus, and again, some of those infections, at least as far as my officers are concerned, have been very serious.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. This is what they're up against. They don't want to catch this either. Chief, thank you for coming on the program.
You're welcome, and thank you for inviting me.
The Biden administration will spend $250 million on an ad campaign that aims to convince skeptical Americans to get the vaccine. And they may want to run some of those ads on Fox's propaganda network. Only 50% of Republicans say that they've either gotten a dose or that they want to get a dose. 28% of Republicans say they will refuse to get vaccinated, and another 10% of Republicans say they will only get it if they're required to. That includes some lawmakers.
I'm going to weigh in on all this real quick. Maybe I shouldn't, but I'm going to because I feel like that it needs to be addressed. How that they can come up with these...
We are told that he thinks younger Americans should wait
that they can come up with these
Americans
numbers
are vaccinated first, which is different from...
How that they can come up with these numbers is beyond me. It is just... It's actually mind-boggling to hear them come up with these numbers. Before we do that, let's listen to what the president has to say.
This as a group of House Republicans visit the southern border to...
I don't guess we're going to be able to pick up on that.
Will have been completed within the next 10 days. and 100 million checks in people's pockets.
This as a group.
Okay, well, he's talking about the stimulus checks that's going out. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing coming from the government towards trying to put a Band-Aid on all this. But, you know, if parents can pay for their children to this day going down to Florida and spending, ain't no telling us how much money on hotel fees and basically handing these kids a plastic card, a blank check, and say, do as you wish, tells me that people that's in a certain category, aren't really hurting as much as what they're letting on. In addition to the stupidity of going down there to begin with. Stripping off all your clothes and doing heathenistic things out in the general public. You know, it's one thing whenever people was doing heathenistic things in their own privacy of their own homes, or confined in their hotel, or doing things in a private type manner. But when you start bringing all this out into the public, then it puts the wrath of God, I'm going to use the word properly, the wrath of God, condemnation, retribution, on a completely different level, such as what was going on in other cultures throughout other generations. This young generation, that by and large wasn't allowed to whip because we was going to do psychological damage to little Johnny and little Sally. This younger generation, it's been given everything in the world toward trying to spoil them, has basically been turned into a group of monsters. And whenever I'm talking about monsters, I'm not talking about The Walking Dead. I'm not talking about the zombies. I'm talking about people with cruel intentions that are so defiant that you're not going to foster them into doing anything, even if it's for their own benefit, against their own will. And if it means for them to get violent with people that are trying to enforce this, and keep in mind, whenever you got spring breakers, they're not just spring breakers in Florida. That's just only where the majority of them are. There's spring breakers going to all the coastlining areas right now. It doesn't matter if it's in LA, Phoenix, Arizona, Brownsville, Texas, different parts of the coast, Destin, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Gulfport, Mississippi. It doesn't matter. Wherever there's water and wherever they can pull off all their clothes and walk around flaunting themselves in front of each other, that's what they're going to do. And it's one thing, listen to me carefully, it's one thing to dress moderately out in the sun whenever it comes to people putting on shorts and whenever it comes to people putting on some loose tops that will be more airish, pertaining to being able to get some air exposed to your body. But it's another thing to walk around with dental floss barely covering over your nipples and barely covering over the middle part of your loins, pertaining to what you're trying to impose upon to everybody else. Society is out of hand. It's totally out of hand. Last year, we spent a little under $1 trillion on natural catastrophes alone. Hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, fires. All these events all added up to the taxpayers' expense. That ain't counting what it's costed since COVID has come into existence, which is, give or take, about $6 trillion. We have spent in a year what we spent in 20 years with the Iraqi war, only on COVID. Last year alone, on natural catastrophes, was almost $1 trillion. I heard of a case where a submarine, an American submarine, has been infestated with bed bugs to the point that they're having to call off their duties to come back home and clean out their bunkers to kill all the bed bugs. From bed bugs to ticks, from locusts to the poisonous bees, to the floods, to the fires, to the tornadoes, to the hurricanes, to a microscopic germ that we have named COVID-19, along with us being trillions and trillions of dollars in debt, along with people that has messed their minds up towards becoming overdosed on drugs and having children that was basically already addicted to heroin and other types of drugs. We as a society are in a mess. And until we see a major revival, a revolution happen here in America, it's only going to grow worse. I admire what President Biden is trying to do. I admire his zeal towards wanting to get some money out there to the general public, because he can understand and realize that the general public are becoming obsessed in madness, in violence. Whenever you see all these different events that's happening all over the countryside again and again and again, in addition to what went on January the 6th up at the Capitol building, but whenever you see these things occurring again and again and again, as a leader, you understand that the storm clouds are brewing. We are under attack. It's just a matter of time before we as a society, not just here in America, but throughout the planet, is going to be in the eye of the storm. Now, the next question leads to this. Whenever it gets so dangerous, and whenever it gets so bad, that we as a society can no longer function as a society, do you really think that God is going to give us a get out of jail card free, a get out of free card jail card free, in addition to how that he has brought condemnation to other cultures and other generations? If God the Father didn't allow for other people to get away with the same type of heathenistic activities, especially out in the eyes of the general public, to the point that they're basically walking around nude, men and women. It's one thing to put on a pair of shorts, down around your knees, or even a little higher than that. I know the females, they like to wear the short shorts all the way to their crotch. But it's one thing to wear a pair of shorts and a loose shirt where you can get a little air, and it's another thing to strip off all your clothes and go on a party binge, to the point that police officers are being violated and hurt because they're trying to bring order to that particular area or to that particular scene. Whenever society gets out of hand this badly, that's whenever we have to worry about not just a hurricane, a tornado, a drought, a flood, a snowstorm, but that's whenever we have to start worrying about other things. And you may be asking, well, Juby, what are you saying? I'm saying that we are at the mercy of God 24/7, regardless whether or not you're awake or you're asleep. And at any given time, he could remove his guiding hand off of the planet called Mother Earth and allow for us to be bombarded by solar flares that would absolutely be devastating to this planet. And I'm really surprised that we hadn't already been bombarded by solar flares, and I'm really surprised that we hadn't been bombarded by a comet or a meteor half the size of Texas already. Because whenever you continue to agitate and shake your fist in the face of God, like you can just do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it, and there's no consequences in doing it. Whenever you continue to do this as a society, there is red flags going up everywhere right now pertaining to danger, 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 danger. Mr. Biden sees this, and Ms. Harrison sees this, and they're trying to get the message out to the general public. Now they've come up with some sort of deal with the antidote over in Germany that their prime minister has pulled a lot of the COVID antibacteria shots off of the market because they're afraid that it's causing blood clots. Now, I don't know if these blood clots are a few incidences or if it's many incidences, but I do know that it has brought enough awareness to the point that it was on CNN this morning pertaining to some company that had made a particular antidote that was being looked at, analyzed, inspected, magnified to the degree that they're pulling it off the shelf right now as a cautious event, not knowing for sure if this medication is causing this. I know that I took the shot about 3 days ago, and the first night I had severe headache all night long, and it felt like every old injury that I'd ever had was reeking out towards it hurting more so than what it normally does. Could have been the weather. A lot of times I blame how I feel on the weather. If the humidity's up, if it's hot, if it's cold, if it's raining. I have a tendency a lot of times to say, well, it's the old arthritis and some of those old injuries or some of those joints that's now demanding or crying out in regards towards the weather changing. And to some degree, I'm pretty sure that that's true. But whenever you have taken a shot and you feel the results from it, the way that I felt the results of it, there's no doubt that it's doing something within your blood system. It's changing different particles, biparticles with your DNA towards rearranging your structure inside your blood system. I kind of look at it like this. As many injuries as I've had in the past, I know that my blood has been conformed, reformed, probably 4 or 5 different times, providing upon the seriousness of the injury. Just like in 1983, spring of 1983. Whenever I had a bad accident, a car rolled over on top of me, and I lost 9 units of blood. 9 units. Weighed basically 160 pounds at the time. 9 units of blood. That means I bled out. That means whenever they started operating on me and pumping blood up into me, I basically went through a whole blood transfusion. Well, do you not think that that would change different particles of my DNA particles? Sure it did. Sure it did, because I have no idea towards where that blood come from. I don't know if it come from an American or if it come from somebody overseas. I don't know if the people that had issued out that blood may have been on drugs, may not have been on drugs. They may have been in good shape. They may not have been on good shape. I don't know. But I do know this. My body went through a transformation period that took me about 2 weeks before I finally got over the nerve disorder that it was causing towards the major accident that I went through in 1983. In other words, it took a while for my body to catch up towards what was going on. Keep in mind, I'd had major surgeries ever since I was born. At the age of 2 weeks old, I had a polycystic kidney, and they put me asleep, and they operated on me, and I come through. So my body has made adjustments, but not everybody's body has made adjustments to major ordeals going on within their blood system. And because of it, it can be so radical that it could possibly cause blood clots. That's what they're talking about right now. But getting off of that, pertaining to the coronavirus, and getting off of Mr. Biden towards trying to tell people to do the right thing, because as of what I heard of today, the coronavirus is still deemed as doing a marvelous job in performance in solving the coronavirus COVID-19 germ problem more so than it's hurting. As of right now, that's what they're putting out to the American people. Right now, they're just saying that it's out of concern. But now, my major concern as a minister of God, and knowing the limitations of where God is and what God expects out of mankind, has reached a different level of concern. You may say, well, I'm not a believer and that don't apply to me. Or you may say, well, I'm a born-again Christian, and because of the love and the teachings of Christ, I don't have to worry about condemnation falling up into my life. You don't understand. Whenever the masses starts doing this as a whole, and we basically have, I'm going to repeat this one more time. We basically have the court system to blame for this, pertaining to the Supreme Court during Obama's administration that legalized same-sex marriages. The fault does not fall upon the feet of the individual that's talking to you right now, that is the founder of the Windmill Ministries. Because I have tried to help again and again and again towards getting this message out, and still to this day, I still do not get no local support from the locals around here. These people have engineered, manufactured this horrible atmosphere that we're all experiencing in one form or the other, regardless whether it's coming in the form of sickness, or it's coming in the form of riots, or it's coming in the form of loss of jobs, or it's coming in the form of a country reeking of being trillions and trillions of dollars in debt. Regardless of how it's affecting people's lives right now on the planet, it's still affecting their lives. I have tried to put out the message again and again, and it's almost as if the church communities, the so-called church communities, let me rephrase that. It's almost as if the so-called church communities is dead set, I want to repeat this one more time, is dead set not to prove Juby wrong, but to prove the Bible wrong and to prove God wrong. I said the so-called churches. You would think by now, after 30-something years, that the locals around here would admit that they have failed. Even though they'd have to walk around with egg on their face. For a good person can make a mistake, but it takes a better one to admit that they've made a mistake. These people have never admitted. The people in Kenton, Tennessee have never admitted that they made a mistake, going all the way back to 1983, if you know anything about my story. The people in Weakley County up here at Martin has never admitted that they've made any type of mistake. The people in Kentucky, pertaining to land between the lakes, and the federal court system up in Paducah, Kentucky, have never admitted that they made a horrible mistake, especially whenever it reeked over into city court or county court there in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, in just outside of Christian County in Trigg County, Kentucky. They have never admitted to any type of mistake in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, after planting a bomb in the back end of my truck and causing property damage, in addition to the damage that they've caused pertaining to my reputation. I've never got any type of apology from the city, state, or federal authorities out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Wow. What happened to the theory for a good person can make a mistake, but it takes a better one to admit? Are we living in a society today similar towards Donald Trump? I'm going to go back and use him for an example. Similar towards Donald Trump, that never would admit that he had ever made a mistake? Even after slandering women, slandering other countries, slandering the rights of immigrants coming over here and ripping children from their arms, even after not acknowledging the seriousness of the coronavirus towards how lethal that it was, misguiding people and leading them on in an entrapment of how that the election was stolen? Have we reached a point in society to where nobody is good enough to say, I've made a mistake? We need to correct this. As these storm clouds continue to boil and get bigger and bigger and bigger, knowing what is approaching, it seems like it's nothing more than a runaway train that nobody is concerned about trying to stop. And as we get closer and closer to the actual event, it's obvious towards what's going to happen pertaining to the collapsation of a broken government. I don't know. I understand the hard-headedness and the stupidness during the era of the pharaohs of Moses, which was basically around 4,000 years ago. If you understand or know anything about history, this don't have nothing to do necessarily with the Bible, but it does have something to do with facts of what actually occurred. I don't know if you know anything about that event, but God made a believer out of those people over 4,000 years ago. And if you don't think that God will make a believer out of the same group of people today, even though they're brushed up, they wear different clothes, they've got a little bit of education, they may think that they're wealthy and rich and nothing's going to hurt them. In other words, they think that they're bulletproof. If you don't think that God will hold us to the same set of standards as he did in other cultures, including Sodom and Gomorrah, you have lost your ability to decipher the difference between fact and fiction. In other words, you're living in fantasy land. You're living in la la land. If you think that the God of this universe is going to sit idly back and allow for humanity to continue to fester and to grow in this type of ungodliness. All the rampant shootings, all the drugs, all the overdoses, all the churches, the so-called churches that's in denial towards basically shaking their fist in the face of God, saying, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it, God? And people are still in denial about what God is actually doing about it. And as these horrors, once more I'm going to use the word wrath, as this wrath continues to fall upon the society, people are still in denial about how come the wrath is coming, pertaining to the sorrows, pertaining to the signs. If we do not straighten up as a society, I promise you, we will be an unfunctionable society. We will bring remorse and grief and sorrow upon to ourselves. This was the development of the resistance movement that began in 1988. And you wonder how come I went up to Land Between the Lakes and planted the very curse that it talks about in the book of Revelations until the time of the curse to be removed, towards God restructuring the universe, not just restructuring the planet, but God will restructure the universe, and he will create a brand new heaven, a brand new earth, and all the former things will be wiped away, and everything will be created new. If you don't understand that and cannot make reference to that, once more, I'm the one that's not in the realm of reality, but it's you, my viewers, the ones that are listening to me right now. It is you who thinks that you're above any type of ridicule or any type of retribution coming from the Heavenly Father that can come in the form of a microscopic germ, from a Category 5 tornado or a hurricane, to fires, to floods, to you name it. It's you who are not in the realm of reality during the time of watching, witnessing, and seeing and experiencing these sorrows and these signs that the Bible talks about. That it would be even as a woman traveling with a child, and as a woman is traveling with a child, her birth pains become more compact together, closer, and they get harder. In other words, they're more aggressive. She feels the pain even more so as the birth pains are leading to the actual birth. Or that's the way that I understand a pregnancy of a woman having a child, the way that it's been explained to me. I've never had a child. I can't vouch for that on a personal level, but I do understand it from a metaphor level, because I have heard and watched too many births on TV. Not that I'm playing doctor or anything, but I've seen too much evidence of just about every woman that I know of, even those that want to be like the Mennonites and have children in a natural form, towards basically having a child in a swimming pool standing up, that in every situation, there's always pain. Always pain that leads to the actual birth. Some of them in today's society, they get physically removed by the doctor. I'm sure in that regard, you don't feel near the amount of pain, but you still have to go through the consequences of having a birth. It's the same way with what we're witnessing right now, with all these horrible, horrible things that continue to happen, regardless whether it's the infestation of bugs, regardless whether it's the beetles, regardless whether it's the bees, regardless whether it's the germs, the bad health, the money situation, all the people that's in federal and state and local jails, the jobs that has moved away from America to the point that now you can drive around And it's as if you have tombstones all over the countryside that used to house 500, 400, maybe 600 people. Some of them was working first shift, second shift, and even some of them third shift that now are standing there, abandoned. That's worth nothing no more than to tear down and to say, my goodness, what happened to the great labor force work era whenever Bill Clinton decided to pass the NAFTA agreement. If certain individuals that have been part of the problem rather than part of the solution to the problem can sit back idly by and act like that they're blind or plead the fifth or plead insanity towards not recognizing what's happening, if they think, beginning in Kenton, Tennessee, if they think that they're not going to be held accountable and responsible for all this, once more, it is not I who is not in the realm of reality. It is them. There's been no one from the state of Tennessee, from the state of Oklahoma, from the state of Kentucky, from the state of Georgia. No one, including Phoenix, Arizona, First Baptist off of Camelback Road, that has called me, wrote me, texted me, sent even a smokestack my way by saying, Juby, we was wrong about you and we're sorry. How can we make this up? We didn't realize what you was involved in and why you was involved in what you was involved in. I still have people up here in Martin, Tennessee that claims that they're law enforcement people, but are sitting idly by towards listening to every word that I speak of and making fun in a mockery type sense, including judges, mayors, city, county, and state officials that sit around gawking at themselves, bragging about what they have, while others are suffering in such of a way. You wonder, or you tend to wonder, where it talks about God was going to destroy the city. He said, if I can find, I think it started out as 100 righteous, then it went to 50, then it went to 20 or 25, then it went down to 10, and finally, there at the last, it said in the Bible, this is recorded about, I think it was pertaining, they was using it hypothetically speaking, it come down to one. Can we find one person in the city that's considered worthy of living, worthy of not going through harm and hurt, worthy of the wrath of God not being poured out upon to his or her head? Can we find just one? And according to the Bible, there was not even the one. And because of it, God brought retribution to that society, to that culture. Once more, the so-called church societies around here, communities, have created these monsters that are now looking for a free handout, stripping off all their clothes, having these orgies, open public orgies, not just in their hotels, but out in the open. Doing drugs and drinking out in the open. Stripping off all their clothes. Some of these whores is having as many as 3 and 4 abortions a year. Simply because they don't want to deal with the responsibilities of being a mother. And you wonder How come I went to the sacred site up by Land Between the Lakes, up by Legal Road 142, by Sugar Bay, and God led me into planting a curse up onto a society of people? You wonder? Quit wondering. It should be obvious why that I was led in doing this or influenced in doing this. In the meantime, I was fighting all kinds of demons up in Livingston County, up in Paducah, where Paducah's from. I think it's Caldwell County, up in all the major counties in western Kentucky. In the meantime, I was fighting all the demons that was trying to stop or prevent from me doing what God had called me to do. And of course, whenever I come back to Northwest Tennessee in 2014, my brother and I was attacked again. Not just by one family, but by many families, probably a dozen different families come by here, agitating and provoking, slandering, degrading us for no reason other than them being filled full of hate. To the point that even the judicial system was setting back just like it was a free-for-all or an open hunting expedition. I'm going to repeat that one more time to the judges and the people that's considered the officials in this county. You set back and you allowed for this family at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, to be hunted, agitated, aggravated, tormented, just like it was open season. Dereliction of duty. You was not in our favor as an American citizen, as an American tax-paying citizen that gave you the opportunity of making the money that you're making right now. And some of you are making some very substantial dollars. Yeah. Once more, it's the old school people who have brought this to a head in the regards of where we're at right now towards the broken cross or the broken system. The fault does not fall upon the feet such as myself. The fault does not fall upon the feet of the youth in what that they have regrettably been taught in believing was acceptable or okay or right. That's not where the fault lies. It lies within the adult society that 30 years ago was in fact the pillars of society, but they thought the same way as the pharaohs that we can get by with this. We can overpower this calling. We can overpower this anointing. And we can beat God at his own game. 30 years later, how wrong that society was here in America. That has opened up so many problems with the homeless, so many problems with the elderly, so many problems with our veterans that's wandering around on the streets. That has opened up so many problems with our judicial systems, our local law enforcement, all these crimes that are being committed, all the violence. They have opened up I'm going to repeat it one more time. They have opened up the genie bottle. And now the genie's out of the bottle. And they're still in denial. They're still sitting back and allowing for their children to behave like heathens. There's still not a major movement as far as a reckoning. As I have said before, and I'll say again, may God have mercy on all of us, and good luck to all of us. We here at the Windmill Ministries cannot say that enough as things are falling apart and unfolding the way that they are. And you may think, well, this is a big ploy in giving people $1,400 stimulus checks and everything's going to just up and go away. I promise you. I talked to a business owner yesterday in a predominant home-style restaurant that has been in business now in Jackson, Tennessee, I know personally, for probably 25 or 30 years by the same person. I'm not going to mention their names. He's got a humongous pond right beside his place of business that usually has ducks and geese and etc. walking around. He told me that it was so bad last year in making somewhere between an $8,500 to a $9,000 rent payment on just the building alone, that it was so bad pertaining to the customer base and his food spoiling that the insurance wouldn't pay for because there was a clause in the insurance that stated that under a pandemic, they did not have to pay. Just like under the clause of a war, they do not have to pay. Under other certain clauses, they do not have to pay. But he explained to me that he lost at least a $500,000, $500,000 for a one-man show, a restaurant in Jackson, Tennessee, give or take about 60, 75 miles from here. That he explained to me it was only because of good management skills towards him putting back enough money for a rainy day that he today is still in business and still serving good, predominant food. A lot of people wasn't that lucky. A lot of people wasn't that smart. A lot of people didn't have that type of money set aside for a rainy day. And because of it, it has affected not just the restaurant chain, in which the restaurant chain is the ones that took a big lick pertaining to the hospitality and pertaining to the hotels and pertaining to the cruises and pertaining to the airline industry. But this thing has affected down, I'm going to call it the food chain, pertaining to the labor force. This thing has affected everything from Disney World, Six Flags, to your local steakhouses and everything in between. It has affected people's lives to the point that the mid class, the working class, has lost even the footing that they already had. So in some situations, to some people, $1,400 is another drop in the bucket pertaining to what it's actually going to take to straighten this mess out, especially whenever you're already 3, 4, 5, 6 months behind on your rent or your mortgage or your car note. People don't understand where we are. And to think that they can load up and head down to Daytona, Florida, or load up and head down to Miami, Florida, that is a known beach down there that you can walk around topless. There's all kinds of nudist colonies in Florida. They're more privatized today than what they was, to some degree, but they're still out there. But to think that we can just turn a 180-degree turn from being hunkered down to now living wild again, like a bunch of heathens, and there's not going to be consequences, you're only fooling yourselves. Once more, the founder of the Windmill Ministries did not create this. It did not manifest this. It was the lack of support coming from the church communities that watered down the Joe Osteen messages to the point of putting us where we are today. And how these ministers can be as wealthy as somebody like Joe Osteen is beyond me. That your riches is not supposed to be of this world. Your riches is supposed to be in the heavenly kingdom. But to have the worth of over $100 million is pretty well self-explanatory. The proof's in the pudding towards where your priorities are. A matter of fact, I think a couple years ago, a major hurricane hit down there pretty close to Houston. It tore them up real bad, flooded them real bad. The general population was crying out for help, needed refuge, and they was coming in the Joe Osteen Coliseum, and the Joe Osteen party stood up and rejected them for about 4 or 5 hours before it made headline national news. And once they realized that we was going to be looked down upon for doing this, we must open our doors to the general public. The point that I'm trying to make is that before that event happened, it was pretty obvious that the Joe Osteen crowd in the Coliseum is nothing more than a club. They're a club of people that take care of themselves. It's just a bigger club. It's just a more wealthier club than the majority of the churches. But whenever you get to looking at the churches, don't think for a second that they haven't hoarded money. Don't think for a second that they haven't hoarded food pertaining to being people like the Davidians down in Mount Carmel, Texas, waiting for the doomsday day to come. Don't think that they don't have boats, tractors, airplanes, and everything else in the church's name towards getting not only the benefit of being tax exempt, but now they can use it and abuse it any way they want to. In the meantime, Uncle Sam, Big Brother, Old Glory, gets the brunt of the deal towards everybody crying out to her every time there's a raindrop that hits the ground wrong. I have never seen a society that was this greedy and selfish and so wicked. You got some of these people that have become billionaires off of this tragedy that has hit in 2020. You got people like Walmart, Amazon, other companies that have made oodles and gobs of money off of this particular event, that, if the truth be known, would share very, very little whenever it come to putting out to the needy, because they themselves are the greedy. Let's put all the burden upon the big brother. She can handle it. Oh, Glory can handle the pressure, even though she's now knocking on $30+ trillion in debt. If this society don't turn this around some way or another, there may not be a society. Not the same type of society that we have initially thought of towards being a productive society. Because God will put an end to it one way or the other, even if he has to intervene the same way that he's intervened in other cultures throughout other generations that thought that they had a license to get out of jail free card. Good luck to all of us, and shalom. As we've said before and we'll say again, God bless you and God bless America. And good luck. Because you're going to need it.